Good evening, everyone. I welcome you on behalf of the library, the Friends of the Library, and tonight's food sponsor and partner, the City of Duluth and the Duluth Fine Arts League. Lynn Cullen is the best-selling author of historical novels The Sisters of Summit Avenue, Twain's End, Mrs. Poe, Reign of Madness, and I Am Rembrandt's Daughter. The 2022 Duluth Reads selection is her novel, Mrs. Poe. It was named a Book of the Week by People Magazine, an NPR 2013 Great Read, and an Oprah Book of the Week. Lynn's novels have been translated into 17 languages, and she has appeared on PBS's American Masters. Her next book is due out in February. Please welcome Lynn Cullen.
Thank you. What an honor to be here. I can't believe you're all here. Thanks so much for choosing my book and for coming out in this heat wave to join me tonight. As I said, I'm thrilled to be here. You know, with COVID, this is the second event I've done in like 2 years, so it's like getting back on the bike, though, learning how to do it all over again. Anyhow, thank you so much. We're going to talk tonight a lot about Poe, because I understood that a lot of you have read it. Yay! Yay! Well, consider this a book club. We're just having a book club with a lot of pictures. I'm going to start with bunches of pictures to give you a background of it, and then we'll have a book club discussion. And the interesting thing about book clubs is, do you know that they actually started in Poe's time? I talk about it in the book. You know, Anne Charlotte Lynch's Conversaciones, they were the first book clubs. So she didn't know it, but she was starting a fine tradition. All right, so I guess I could look at this. Oh, thank you. She said she liked the cover. That never gets old, thank you. So I'm going to tell you about Mrs. Poe by showing you a lot of pictures that I use for my research. Because for a historical fiction, you have to have all kinds of input to understand what you want to write about, and then for the setting, and if you're me, just because you love the history, it's really fun. And so, without ado, we're going to talk about this man. It's very odd that I chose him as a subject. I did not know much about Poe any more than anybody in high school. But several years back, during the recession, my husband had lost his job, and my contract with my publisher was suspended. And it was at this terrible time for us. My husband came down with encephalitis, and it was really scary. He was in an altered state. He was like this crazy animal thing, and he went unconscious. He was in a coma, and when they said, yeah, we don't know what he'll be like when he comes out. Well, when he came out, he didn't have much of an attention span. You know, when you see TV shows and they say, follow the finger, and I always thought, that's so phony, you know, TV doctor stuff. They did that with him, and he failed. He just did not have any attention. So he went home after, a week, and he was in bed, and I was thinking, how am I going to support the family? I don't know what's going to happen with Mike, and I don't know what's going to happen with me. So I was in my office. Oops, I don't know what I did there. I was in my office freaking out, and Poe popped in my head. And as I said, I was not a Poe person. But so I went over to my computer because something really insisted that I look at Poe. And I thought, I do like that he's this underdog in a way. He was this orphan and foster child and very unloved, and the man so desperately wanted love, and he wrote, I think, to get love. And he finally got it in 1845 with The Raven. But I saw that in 1 year's time, he went from like the king of the world. Everybody wanted to be near him. Everybody knew the Raven. He was a rock star, the rock star of his age. And in a year's time, he went from that to being an outcast. And I thought, what happened? And I read rumors of him having an affair with Frances Osgood. And it was reading about Frances Osgood that she was a mother of 2 children whose husband had abandoned her, and she was a poetess. She wanted to try to support herself on writing, even though that was so impossible then. It's worse than now, and now it's bad. And so she, when I read about her, the hair stood up on my arms. I thought, I know you, and the book just from there. So it's odd, but I just had to write this book about him. And again, so I had to start doing research and figure out, how I was going to do this book. And I knew I had a hypothesis. It was about how he went from the pinnacle of success to an outcast in a year's time, and that she was the reason for it. And my book, by the way, I talk a lot about Poe, but the main character, as you know, is not Poe, because I always want to write from a woman's point of view. I feel like it's more authentic that way. And we just need our voice heard anyhow, darn it. So this is Frances Osgood. This is how she looked. She was actually, when her husband abandoned her at the conversaciones, the guys did all kind of flock around her because she was charming and witty and beautiful. I think her husband did this painting. As you know, he was a portrait painter and kind of a creep. Anyhow, so as you know, Poe in 1845 was not like that gloomy picture that I first had up on the screen, the one that everybody's familiar with. This is how he looked. This was done in 1845, this drawing. Now, this was actually by Samuel Osgood, Francis's husband. He did this one, and I thought, it's kind of funny, I think he made him look effeminate, because, I thought he was competition, so I'm going to not make him look his best. Now this guy, I talk about this in the book too, about how this portrait painter made him look like he was melting wax. He has a candle that was melting, and I kind of thought, yes. But even that one, you could tell that this is not the sinister, creepy guy. Now, photographs don't lie. He still doesn't look sinister. Actually, looks terribly uncomfortable. And as you know from reading the book, it's probably because he had a rod up his back to keep him straight. Here's another one. See, not bad looking. And people just thought he was great. They wanted to go hear him. Okay, forget him. They wanted to go hear him at the conversaciones. And here is Rufus Griswold, the guy who we can thank. Yeah, if you've read the book, you could throw your popcorn now. He is the guy who gave us the image of Poe that we have, because he's the one who, they were in competition for Frances and everything else, for being the king of book critics. And so he, because Poe was down, the year after The Raven, when Poe was down, this guy had more leverage, and by the time Poe died, he was still, on the outs with society. So he said, I'll write the biography, and he made him sound like, a terrible drug addict and madman, which people bought because his books are, crazy people. So they're like, well, yeah, Poe's like that. The funny thing is in the long run, he lost, because everybody loves the madman to this day. They like the dark guy. But as you know, as readers of Mrs. Poe, that's really not how Poe was in 1845. He was an athlete. I show you this picture because this is Turtle Bay. And this is those rowboats. I have a scene in the rowboat there. Turtle Bay, by the way, is where the UN Center is in New York. So it used to look like that. And this also illustrates, in the book, there's a lot about how the city's being changed. The grid is being put in effect. They bulldozed with mules and men the whole island to make it flat so Astor and a few others could make a lot of money. But that's why Central Park, if you've been to New York, and Central Park has all the boulders, that's how the island all looked. Okay, so this is our patron saint of book clubs. This is Anne Charlotte Lynch. And it was in her house that everybody gathered. Margaret Fuller. I note here that she doesn't have an Indian necklace on. You know, that I had her dress in that in my book because she was an authority and loved Native American things, art. This is Matthew Brady, the photographer. And I'm going to show you just some of the different characters. And these were handy when I was writing because I looked at their pictures and tried to describe off of the picture. This is Horace Greeley, the newspaper editor, the guy who said, go west, young man. This is Walt Whitman when he was younger, and he would have been young when he went to the Conversaciones in 1845. This is Clement Moore. Is it C. Clement Moore, I believe? The guy who wrote The Night Before Christmas. He was at these Conversaciones. And one interesting thing about him is his estate. I think I mentioned this in the book. His estate was called Chelsea. And that's the part of New York now that's Chelsea. That was his estate. And who can't forget Sylvester Graham, the inventor of graham crackers. Yeah. Yes, and as you know, he invented them to save us all from our lust. Yeah. He thought if you ate enough of his whole grains, your lust would go away and everything would be good. So here he is. Yeah, he was trying. This is Samuel Bartlett. And he's important because when I was doing my research, he is the one who had Francis staying at his house, and Poe would go to his house. And he said in real life that Poe would stay every night till after midnight that summer of 1845. And we all know what happens after midnight. So I thought, yep, Poe, this guy, you know, was saying that evidence enough for me that they were having an affair, which made me sad when I went to New York. I think I was saying in my podcast a minute ago, but I'd go to every scene of my books. In order for things to be authentic, for all my books, I go to every single scene. The place has totally changed, like Turtle Bay, but it's just important to me for the authenticity of the book. And so I went to where his house would have been. There's like a Subway sandwich shop there and a Kinko where the house was. But I could see just a few houses away was where Poe was staying. And it made me so sad for Virginia because Virginia could look out her window and see Poe going right to, you know, where Francis was. They warned me about this. Oh, no, it's a train. They warned me that there's going to be other announcements too, so they're trying to trick me up. Can't be done. Anyhow, that's kind of fun. Looks like a movie back there. So anyhow, he's important because he stayed, or Poe visited Francis at his house. And this handy little lithograph of New York was my roadmap for Poe's 1845 New York. This is actually Brady's art or photography studio. You can see the light, the sunroof, you know, letting in the light for his photography. Here is Barnum's, up here would be where Barnum's museum is. And this is Broadway, by the way, and that's Trinity Church down there. So I just kind of would stare at this, thinking of them on these streets. And this also helped. I have some scene where they're in the snow and carriage, and this was a painting from that time period. And it just shows how the streets were not like these orderly stoplight, organized things. It was bedlam in the streets. This is in front of Barnum's Museum, and there's the orchestra that I mentioned. This is a true thing. He had a horrible orchestra to drive people indoors. Kind of cracks me up. This is right near, over here is Washington Square, and these are the houses. So I just wanted to get the feel for the neighborhood, and that is still much like that, very much. It's one of the few there's a number of streets, but it's an authentic street that you can visit to this day. It's, I think, I'm not sure if it's the same one that Anne Charlotte Lynch's place is on. I'll show you that in a second. This is another angle of Washington Square that I used for a scene in the book when they met in Washington Square. So, if I did enough digging, I could really find a lot of pictures that helped, even though everything's so changed now. Now that is Anne Charlotte Lynch's house. They were doing some renovation there, so I made free of the porch. And I have to admit, I kind of teared up sitting on the porch thinking of all those people, even Sylvester Graham going up those steps, they all tread there, so many famous people for their book clubs. I was fortunate, we all are fortunate, that this house still exists. This is the Merchants House Museum. This is not far from Washington Square and where Poe lived, and the scene of the action was. And in it is a perfectly preserved home from the 1800s. And because the woman who lived here was really eccentric, she inherited it as a child, and she lived a really long time, so it was never changed from the 1800s. So it was great research, because all the houses back then in Poe's time, in the mid-1800s, if you had a lot of money, unless you were Astor and built something bigger, generally people just had the exact same layout. So it was great for me to figure out how the house was where Francis was visiting. Here's the kitchen, which was kind of handy. I love these bells here. I had to work those in. And every time I watched Downton Abbey and would see those bells, I thought, I've seen bells like that. They're right there in that kitchen for the servants. And again, it's really helpful to go to a scene. In this case, I got an idea for a scene by standing in this parlor. The docent was explaining how these chandeliers were lit, the gas ones were lit. She said, you draw it down, you take a match from the fireplace and you light it. And I said, wow, isn't there a chance for an explosion? And she said, oh yes. And I just thought, right on the spot, I gotta work that in. I'm gonna work that in. So it became a scene in the book, or part of a scene in the book. Now here is Trinity Church from Wall Street at the time of Mrs. Poe. So we're looking right at it. And there's the scenes in the book, and I had to do my research there. Because you know how in the climax that she is looking out the window of the bell tower, well, that actually exists. And I was able to go up there and stick my head out. You really can. So I am willing to go to any length to, make something authentic. And yes, that is that this right here. It looks like that. And that one was broken out, and I could actually look out there. They also let me ring the bells, which is hard. It's like, how you see Quasimodo kind of flying up, in the cartoon. The rope will carry you right up. So it was fun. The things I learned writing books. And so in my first draft of the book, it ended at a different spot. It didn't end in 1846 altogether. And I was meeting in New York with my editor, and she said, have you ever been to the Poe Cottage? And I said no, because he didn't live there at the time of my book, and I just don't feel the need to go there. She said, you know, Lynn, I really feel like you should go. I didn't know why, but I said, okay, I'll go. So I called there, and they said, well, we're closed. Sorry, you can't come. And I said, well, I'm going out of town. Is there any way? And they said, well, we have a group of 8th graders going through. So I tagged along with this 8th grade class, and I'm so glad I did. It changed my book. When I saw how tiny that house was, I was looking around. That house could fit in this room, and the upstairs was hardly an upstairs. It was just so tiny. I remember going home to my garage thinking, my garage is as big as this house. And I don't have a huge garage. It's just a 2-car garage. And I saw this bed, this rope bed that Virginia Poe lay on, and her in her final days, and that I had read how she had his army greatcoat over her and the cat, Katerina, for warmth, because they were so poor they couldn't even afford proper blankets. And when I imagined her there suffering like that, I changed the book. In my early draft, she was the villain. And I thought, she doesn't deserve to be the villain. She really suffered. So it pays to go to sites, because you might just have to change your book. And here's a person who blew everything. This is Elizabeth Elliot, who had designs on Poe herself. And you should never trust a woman in sausage curls, I say. And there she is. So all these things were put together, and that's how Mrs. Poe came to be. I think that's all the pictures. So at this point, do you have any questions? This is the book club section of the evening.
The Little Cottage you just showed us, where was that? Was that in New York City?
That's in the Bronx.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which in the day, it was considered way out of town,
Sure.
But now you just hop in the subway and you're there. But yeah, that was considered banished. He was banished.
So that end scene, the boat, she went to the cottage, Osgood went to that, you had her going to that cottage?
Yes.
Where they were so poor.
Yeah.
Mrs. Cullen, is there any proof that she did any of those naughty?
No, this.
Did people like the fire and, the
Pushing her off the boat.
Yeah, pushing her off the boat. I mean, is there any fact, or is there anything written about that?
No. This is where the novel comes in, fiction comes in. Now, what has been written about her is people really thought that she was sneaky and underhanded, same word, I guess, and that, like, for example, she would give someone one of Poe's books, and then she'd go to their house and take it back and sell it. And she did stuff like that. She kind of stole little things. But here's the thing: they were dirt poor, and the people who were saying tisk tisk tisk, who they were in a position that they could think that she was awful for trying to survive. And since I've written the book, I've actually kind of come around about her. Somebody had to be a villain, okay, but now I'm actually toying with the idea for, in the future, writing a book with her as a character, and sort of kind of like the Joker. You get the background of the Joker, showing who she was, because she actually, I think I mentioned it, she got Poe his job at that newspaper job in town. She walked down there before he did and told them that he needed a job, and got it for him. So she had a lot of gumption, and I think he loved her. But she also had, on the other hand, when I went to the Poe Museum in Richmond, the curator there was saying that she did have kind of a creepy reputation. He said, and check these out. And he showed me her hosiery, which were covered in a spider web weave. It was like she had her legs in spider webs. And he said, creepy, right? And yeah. So I don't know, but would you all tell me, you're going to be my, what's the word when you, sounding board, yes. Would you be interested in a book about Muddy? Not really, okay. Well, okay. I'll put that one out of my mind. Next.
Was this book your very first book?
Oh, no. I wrote children's books, and I've lost track of how many of those I did. I did maybe 15 of them. Middle grade fiction. That's how I got started. You know, I always knew I was going to be a writer somehow, but I had no connections. I was an English major, you know, English lit major in college. That was all I had. But yet I was determined that I was going to be a writer. So I got an idea for what I could do when I went to my oldest daughter's school. When she was in kindergarten, I went over there and said, where could I volunteer? How about the library? Started working in the library. And I started reading middle grade fiction. And they had such great books, like Betsy Byers' books and Paula Fox. I just loved those books. I thought they were as good as any adult book, just shorter. And I had 3 kids in 4 years' time at that time. And so I thought short is good. And maybe this would be a way of breaking in. And indeed, I did start with doing middle grade fiction and picture books, and then a YA, and then these books. And I think I'm so bad with numbers. This is why I write as well. Terrible with numbers. I think this is my, my current book is my 6th book for adults.
And most of them are historical fiction, aren't they?
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah, I love history. You just can't make me not do it. Yeah.
Your book was wonderful for me, very educational. I grew up in Europe and I didn't know all the background that a normal education would give you here. My question is, all the interesting facts I learned, they are actual. I don't know how much of the history, is that factual history?
I tried really hard in this book to not veer off. Now, so these characters, they are real characters. Anything you read about New York, I researched that heavily. Now, you know, I play with the plot line some, but all the places you see and all the history, and like about Astor, and even with the Astor, with the, he had his people throw him in a blanket toss to keep him young. That was real. That was something I read, because I love sharing those crazy tidbits like that. You know, I just, whenever I read them, I'm like, I can't wait to have people read that, because if they make me laugh or whatever, I hope it makes others laugh too. So yes, you can be sure that you got.
Very educational, and I really appreciate you putting in the full length of The Raven. I've always heard about it, and I've never had a chance to read it. And I was so glad to find it.
Oh, thank you. I'll have to tell my publisher. Somebody like that Raven. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Is that an actual photograph of Mrs. Poe?
No. In fact, it's a kind of funny story about the cover. Covers are always such a shock for writers. You never know. Like, you always have something in your head pictured for your book, and it's always something different. So when they brought this one, it looked exactly like this, but the woman was the creepiest looking thing. I think they wanted it to be scary. And I'm really was close to my dad and loved him, but she looked like my dad, you know, and I just thought, no, that is not good. But I was new with these people, that publisher at the time, so I didn't want to say anything. But fortunately, the head of Simon & Schuster, Carolyn Reedy, took an interest in this book early on, and she saw that cover and said, no way. So they tried different ones, but they came back to this one with this other woman, and the minute I saw it, I thought, they nailed it. They nailed it. So they had all of it but the head. And in fact, even the creepy woman had the same, you know, blouse and everything. They just put this attractive head in there for my dad's head. So, any other Questions? Yeah.
Could you tell us how you write? Like, I saw an author once who collected things in journals, little snippets, and then come back later and take the best. Do you write with the computer and you're researching? Or how do you do it? What's your process to get to the end?
Well, for one, I'm disorganized. Just tell myself, oh, that's part of the creative process. I think it's just because I'm lazy, but I write Post-it notes or notes on anything I can find, envelopes, whatever. As something occurs to me, I jot it down. And so I have this pile of notes near me, and I don't outline or anything like that. But in a story like this, the history is what led me. I had my hypothesis, from the start about what happened to Poe in 1845 and what was their relationship. So everything was just building that case as I wrote. But I had a different ending, like I said, even. It's fun to not know where you're going, because my favorite thing, the biggest gift for a writer, for putting in all the time, because it takes so much time and loneliness in your writing when you have to let everything else go, including your family and all, that your gift is every now and then things just fall into your lap, little pieces that fit together, and that is such a thrill. It's like it's like being a detective, and then you find this lead to your case, and that's really exciting. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for being here, by the way.
Oh,
this is awesome. This
my
is
pleasure.
like wonderful knowledge. For people who may want to write in here, especially educators, I think it's amazing how you kind of were able to write for children. Because I think that's it's an audience that's so beautiful, and it's a great target to kind of get in the door. But my question is like, how did you break in? Did you self-publish those children books, or did you wait for a publisher? Like, how was that process like?
Well, writing for children is easier in the fact that you have the SCBWI, Society for Book Writers and for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And they have meetings that you can go to, local chapters. You go to these bigger groups. But more important to me is they had, now I haven't been part of that for 20 years, but I think they're still going strong. And they had this newsletter, and I think they still do, that was showing what publishers look for. And I was reading that one time after I finished my novel, and saw who they want. And I have to go back first and say I'd written some other things that were just experimental pieces. You don't start out with something perfect. You just don't. It's a learning process. And I remember getting back a card from a publisher editor saying, I don't know if this is fish or fowl. And I thought, okay, it was too long. It was too long for a children's book, and that's why she didn't know. So you have to know your genre. But anyhow, once I kind of figured out my genre, which is really step one, I saw the marketing people, and I saw that this one publisher, this one editor, was new at this publishing house. It was Houghton Mifflin, which was a big New York place. I always thought I'm going to go for the big ones, and got plentifully rejected for that too. But I went for that, and she was a good fit because she was looking for people. So I think that would still work, once you get your stuff polished enough that that you know where to send to. And back then, and I think it's still true for children's, I don't know if anybody does children's still, but I think you could still do it without an agent. It's so hard finding an agent. What happened for me then, so I did a number of children's books and decided as my kids got older, and I had more time, because that's why I did children's books. I just didn't have time. And I know people who do adult books with little kids. I don't know how they do it. Anyhow, I started doing adult books, and I thought that I thought I had an entry into the adult world. My agent gave it to my editor at Bloomsbury who did children's books. But I was really sad because that editor was supposed to give it to the adult division of Bloomsbury. She kept it for herself, and I remember my editor called me. I was in the car coming from Florida, and I cried. She said, "We have a contract. It's for a children's book, a YA, a young adult." And I was like, "Oh no, that's supposed to be my adult book." But you know what? Well, I'm here to tell you that everything works out. You just keep trying, because that YA was picked by, I have no idea why, by Barnes & Noble for Discover Great New Writers. And I was able to get a better adult agent who made my career. My next book did not go to the children's division, and so it went from there. But I had to pay dues. That's one thing. People aren't willing to pay dues anymore. They're just like, I'm going to self-publish. And that's okay, but that's so much work, and it's so unsatisfactory. I think it's such a heartbreaking thing. So if you are willing to pay your dues and take a few lumps, like I did, Any other questions? Yes.
The part where Francis and Poe exchanged the anonymous poems, was that factual?
Yes.
That was fascinating.
Yes, the one at the Valentine's Day party. Actually, all the writing in the book between them is real writing. I didn't make up any of the. In fact, that was part of my fun, trying to tell the story about those particular pieces, how that worked. And so I wanted to, tell the story about when he sent that Valentine, which just was such a unconscious thing to do, because it was so bad for her, but he was so desperate for her, because of course they all had to protect her from him, no matter how she felt about him, or she would lose her children. So, yeah.
Can you tell us what the original ending was?
I can't remember. I think it had to do with the church and all that, but I don't remember exactly. I did have going to the church and up in Trinity and all that, but I didn't have her going to the house.
Did you have a picture of Mrs. Poe?
There is none, but the one that they think is one, and I don't agree. They don't have a picture of Virginia Poe. The legend goes, I might have mentioned this in the author, so the legend goes that when she died, when she was dying, they realized, there's no picture of Virginia. We've got to get a picture of Virginia. And the legend goes, they went down the street and got a local artist who came back and did a picture of her, and that's her in her deathbed. Well, I say baloney, because actually, I think it's Frances Osgood. Kind of looks like that picture of her. But look at that, the chin and the fullness of her face, her skin. When you're dying of tuberculosis, consumption, you are not plump like that and healthy looking. So, yeah, no steroids in those days. So I just don't feel like that's her. And the more I look, I don't say this in the book, but afterward, the more I looked at this, the more I thought, that looks a lot like that picture of Frances Osgood. And I could see that Samuel, who, was good with, except when he did posed portrait, was good with his work. I could see this being his. Good questions, good book club. All we need is wine. Yes.
Kind of a hard question, so if you can't answer it, it's okay. I'm interested in your process of checking out the historical stuff and reading the documents. Was there anything that you actually had to cut from the book, a character, a place that you really wanted to get in there, but it just didn't make the final?
I wrote this long enough ago, I can't remember that. I'm sure there was. This book is unusual, though. My other books, I have so many things I have to cut. This one was sort of a gift, I guess. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, my husband recovered. I forgot to tell you guys that. Yes. Yeah, and the crazy thing about that is, I told you he had no memory, he couldn't read. Well, after a few weeks of being in bed, he got really bored and he asked me, Lynn, you have any books I can read? And I have tons of novels, my friends, whatever, I'm reading, novels. And I said, okay. This guy used to, when he was well, just read magazines and newspapers. But I gave him my novels, and then weeks went by, and he started talking about the characters and the action, and finally the ending of the book. And it was like he was healed by reading novels. So it's really this whole book. Everything was just this crazy, miraculous journey that all turned out for the best. And this is a long way of saying I didn't throw out much for that book, unusually so. I did change, how I had Virginia was my villain, and that was a big change. Muddy was just sort of in the background, and I made her the creepy one. But for example, I have a book coming out in February. It's called The Woman with the Cure. And that book, there's only paragraphs left of it from the first draft. I wrote it over the whole COVID period. I'll tell you about it in a second here. But I had to throw out so much of it trying to find my way with that book. Same for Sisters of Summit Avenue. I threw out lots of that. But the good thing about books is sometimes the stuff you throw out you'll use in a different place. So I don't really despair about it. I always think, it'll find its place, and it does, even in different stories altogether. It works its way in. But about The Woman with the Cure, they all have kind of strange genesis. But that one, I walk every Friday. I've done it for like 30 years with my neighborhood friend who at the time, a few years back, was the oral historian for the CDC. And she was collecting, different oral histories from the public health pioneers. And I remember really being interested in the race between Salk and Sabin for the polio vaccine. I thought that was so fascinating because they were so awful to each other, and they were both such flawed men, yet they were both trying to do something so good and so important. And I just thought, how could I write that book? How could I write that book? And I realized, what, I have to find the women in it, because I write about women, again, just mainly because I feel like that's what's authentic coming from me. And so I had to look. It took me a number of years, and I finally found Dorothy Horseman. Who's heard of Dorothy? Nobody. Nobody's heard of Dorothy Horseman because she's a woman. But it was her discovery that Salk and Sabin based their vaccine on. Without her discovery, there would be no vaccine. And then after the vaccines came out, Salk's ran into a big problem. It's called the Cutter incident, and the vaccine actually killed a number of people, and that's why vaccines are so hard to get licensed now. That's why you could feel good about them, because they have had to jump through so many hoops to get there. It's because of the Cutter incident. They know they had to make them safe. So anyhow, at the time of when Sabin vaccine came out, so they had to test this vaccine, his vaccine, somewhere other than the U.S. So they did it in the USSR. This is back during the Soviet Union. And it was the biggest field trial ever, and I think still is to this day, of a vaccine. And who did they call to verify that this was safe and effective? Dorothy Horseman. So if you're of an age, like I am, that got the polio vaccine in the cube, the sugar cube, it was on Dorothy's say-so. And again, we don't know of her. And by the way, those vaccines, her discovery is the children today, all the babies still get stuff based on her science. So anyhow, I don't know where I was going with that, but I was also going to say that book, I finally decided how to work on that on December 31st, 2019. And I didn't know, till 6 months later, deep into COVID, that was the day that the scientists in the Wuhan province announced that there was this novel coronavirus. So here I was starting my little book about this epidemic at the start of the epidemic. I had no idea. So that's how I spent my epidemic, writing. Right? And the funny thing is, this isn't even funny, in the beginning, during the lockdown, I thought this will really give it, make it authentic. I know what it's like. You're thinking 2 weeks of this and I got it, So, it's way more authentic than I wish it were, but anyhow. So, any other questions? Yes.
I was a director of March of Dimes for years, and so I always used to go and say on April 15th of 1955, the headlines on all newspapers was Salk vaccine found safe, potent, and effective, and that was a big thing.
Yes.
But I didn't know about her, and here I was so involved with all of it.
Nobody does. Even her discovery, she had to end up sharing it with a guy because they kept putting her off and putting her off. She just wanted to finish her work, and they.
Did she work? Did she work in Pittsburgh with?
She was at Yale, yeah, for years and years. In fact, before she was at Yale, she was at Vanderbilt, and she didn't get in there right off the bat. That was for her residency. And she was desperate. She couldn't find, a place anywhere to do her residency. She was an MD. And so they finally said, yeah, okay, we'll take you. She went in there, and the director about had a cow. He thought that D.M. Horstman was a guy. And when he found out it was Dorothy Horstman, he,
And this is a person at Yale had a fit? A person at Yale had a fit?
This was at Vanderbilt, where she did her residency. But after that, she spent all her time at Yale. Decades. Took her ages for them to make her an associate professor, and also to make her a full professor. Her life was hard, but what I loved about her is she didn't care. She early on decided that she was going to do something about polio, and she just did not give up.
Was it in the late 40s, early 50s that she was doing this?
40s, 50s, and early 60s is the time span of the book. And I have that scene. It's one of my favorite scenes is when they discovered, the announcement that Salk's vaccine was safe and effective.
And then Sabin's was live. I mean, they were different in that way.
Yes, yeah. It came out 7 years later, but because of the cutter, and actually Sabin's just took a while to develop as well.
I want that book to get to all the people I work with.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you work there. Interesting. Because there is a lot, and I have in there about Basil O'Connor and stuff, and a lot of March of Dimes stuff. Yes?
I have a question, Lynn.
Yes.
If you're through discussing Mrs. Poe, could you tell us briefly about Creation of Eve, Reign of Madness, and Twain's End?
Okay, my elevator speech for each. You know what, Doug, you ought to open up and just read that sentence that's in the first. That's easier. But authors always love when you get your book printed up and then you see that first sentence in the beginning where they explain. It's like, that's what it's about. Because when you're writing the whole thing, it's hard for you to really nail down what in one sentence. But Creation of Eve, okay, this is like a game show here. Can I do this? It's about Sofonisba Anguissola, the first woman painter, one of the very, very first. She invented genre painting, which is painting of family scenes. They didn't do that before then. Painting was so rare and expensive that it was just for kings and queens, and also they did historical pictures like Michelangelo. They always did the nudes, the historical or biblical scenes of nudes, because that was classical and wonderful. Women couldn't do that, so she just painted family scenes of people fully clothed. She invented that, and she was the painter to the Spanish queen. And this, since I got into Spain and was loving it, the first book was about Philip II, who was Elizabeth of England's nemesis. And so I went back a generation to his mother, who was Philip's, was it her mother? It's been a number of years. No, his mother was Juana La Loca. And there's this big legend of her being so totally crazy that they had to lock her in prison for all these years and let her son and husband rule Spain, which happened to be the most wealthiest country in the world at the time. And I question that in The Reign of Madness. Twain's Inn. It's about Twain's Inn. Let's see. It's how Twain became who he was, but I'm really interested in how becoming Mark Twain obliterated the man and the boy, Samuel Clemens. And I think that was a real dichotomy. I think it destroyed him. So that's what that's about. And actually more, because it's from a woman's point of view. It's not really, it's from his secretary's point of view. How do you do? Thanks. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you much. That was fun. Great book club, guys.
All right, well, I think we're going to come to a close now. So I just want to thank you all for attending. Thank you so much, Lynn, for this in-depth conversation. I think we all enjoyed it. Thank you to the City of Duluth, to the Duluth Fine Arts League for the food and refreshments. And if you haven't purchased your book yet, Eagle Eye Bookshop is still selling Lynn's books, and Lynn will be doing a signing. All right, thank you so much and have a great evening.
Thank you.